Hi folks, Guillotine here. Just as a preface to the rest of this video, I'm going to be talking about some fairly heavy subject matter. This isn't going to be like my usual lighthearted content. I'm going to be talking about video games and how they pertain to violence, misinformation in modern media, politics, and the commission of recent modern tragedies. My goal is not to undermine the tragic loss of life that has taken place. My goal is twofold. First, to attempt to remove a scapegoat and a means of deflection from the talking points whenever solutions come up in serious and earnest discussions. Second, to instill critical thinking when it comes to the art form and medium of video games in order to remove negative stigmas and get more widespread recognition as a serious means of expression. With that out of the way, let's begin. 6 Days in Fallujah, a video game title that has now become prevalent in the news on multiple occasions. A video game set to recreate and tell the story of some of the deadliest days of conflict that the United States has experienced in modern war. Today we have detractors claiming that this game is set to glorify violence, radicalize individuals, and foster discrimination against different ethnicities when it hasn't even been released. So they have no idea if that will be true of the final product. Previously, news outlets got this game preemptively cancelled, saying it was being set to diminish the sacrifice of soldiers that lost their lives. But again, it was never released, so they had no idea if it would be true of the final product. Most individuals have taken a side on the modern incarnation of this matter, either claiming the game is going to be dangerous and portray the aforementioned messages, or individuals, like myself, citing that regardless of the message, it has a perspective to share and a right to exist. As a reminder, this is a hypothetical product that hasn't been released, and when it does release, if you don't agree with it, then don't buy it. But that's not the point of this video. I frequently hear both sides to gaming debates using a phrase that I've come to hate. One that belittles the hard work and artistic vision of the people that go to create these titles. A phrase that's thrown out in a slapdash fashion in order to serve whatever purpose that's deemed appropriate in order to try and dismiss the other person's argument. A phrase that is frequently divorced from context in a matter that ultimately demeans an entire artistic medium. It's just a video game. Let's get started. There are only 4 situations I can think of when "it's just a game" is an appropriate phrase to say. The first I think most people have experienced at one point if they've played a multiplayer game. Someone getting angry, flustered, or toxic to the point of screaming vulgarities, breaking or throwing things, or making threats. That person needs to say to themselves, or have it said to them, that it's just a game, and they need to calm down. That's the easiest one. The second is a rather recent development which has had no shortage of coverage due to the controversy that has stemmed from the implementation of microtransactions tied to mechanics that are psychologically akin to gambling. While gambling addiction is a very serious matter, if someone does have a moment of control over themselves, where they have a chance to think about it, if they're about to spend money on a digital good that has no guarantee of reward or the desired outcome they want, they need to say to themselves, it's just a video game. It's not worth financial ruin or personal hardship. Easy to understand, but harder to implement due to the manipulation from companies that still rely on loot box mechanics. To the third matter, regarding children and video games. I don't believe young children should be playing obscenely violent video games or ones with adult themes and content they may fail to understand on their own. And if they are, that's a failure on the parenting. At which point I think it's fair to say the child is not going to be growing up with the most stable mindset. That's why we have ESRB ratings. A video game isn't a babysitter. It's not a caregiver or a means to get out of responsible parenting. It's not a replacement for a parent or a suitable guardian who should be there to properly raise a child and help them process information in the world. For the third time, it's just a video game. The final situation is where nuance, context, and respect come more into play. Let's look at various video game controversies over the years, particularly anything to do with trying to scapegoat video games as inspiration for violent acts, or even going so far to say they are used to train kids in the acts of violence.
And what does this game seem to teach our kids? Basically, that a gun can solve any problem. With lethal enforcers, sometimes the player hits innocent bystanders. In that case, blood splatters to the ground.
If trained at all in video games, trained on much more realistic video games that frankly looked very much like the shocking video that he live streamed.
We have to do something about maybe what they're seeing and how they're seeing it, and also video games. I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts.
Will do what he's conditioned to do, like a pilot in a flight simulator, like a child in a fire drill.
And that's exactly what a lot of these video games are doing to kids.
Exactly.
Exactly right. You're training them almost to the exact causation.
I'm going to be perfectly clear with this next point. Video games do not cause violence. Video games do not make people violent. Anyone who thinks this is either a fear-mongering mouthpiece attempting to push an agenda that is politically or socially expedient to their own end goal, or someone who is woefully ignorant on the subject who has fallen into the influence of the aforementioned mouthpieces. Actually, that's a bit too complicated. Let's paraphrase these two groups of people. Assholes or idiots. But back up to my previous statement that video games do not cause violence. For the next few seconds, I will simply put on screen the names of studies and sources that have proven video games do not cause violence through sound observation and scrutiny via peer-reviewed methods. Bearing all this in mind, whenever someone tries to start scapegoating video games as the next how-to manual on conducting spree shootings, feel free to tell them. It's just a video game. A video game is not an instruction manual on how to murder people. Computer code will not make someone pick up a firearm to perform an act of violence. A multiplayer match of someone's favorite game is not going to tell someone to bring a knife into a classroom. Violent people seek out violent media that already exists because they like it. And even if a video game is portraying violence, under almost all scenarios, to an adult consumer, that's not going to matter. Now I'm going to go on a slightly different tangent, but to preempt some ignorant statement that I'm sure has been made out there, I'm not going to use the First Amendment as a shield. I'm simply using it to set up the next talking point. In 2011, Brown v. Entertainment Merchants Association, in a 7-2 decision, established through the Supreme Court that video games are a recognized means of artistic expression and, as such, deserves equal protection as books, movies, music, and other mediums as protected means of expression. As a means of expression, video games can be a conduit to which we can experience other worldviews or perspectives. As an example, I believe police are necessary for a functioning society and will usually support them until they step over the line of excessive force. However, through the conduit of rap music, I can have a brief insight of long-standing and deep-seated mistrust of authority figures due to abuse and long-standing social hierarchies that see racial disparity. You can see the world through eyes other than your own and gain a sense of understanding, even if it's a slight one. This, however, can also potentially inject a rather narrow, yet potentially legitimate argument. Looking at books as the easiest example, there have been several works of literature over the years that have contained information or perspectives that have been considered dangerous or obscene, and have been subjected to various levels of censorship or illegality. Let's look to the most extreme example I can think of, the Anarchist Cookbook. An instruction manual on how to manufacture explosives, communication weaponry, and other various items that could be considered instrumental in acts of widespread violence or terror. In spite of the instructional potential in this book that could lead to violence, it is not banned for the average citizen to own. Even with that last qualification, let's think critically for a moment. Other than morbid curiosity, how many average people do you think would pick up this book and immediately be turned into a terrorist simply because they have knowledge on how to construct weapons? Again, violent people seek out violent media. Someone who has ill intention or the desire to cause violence is the kind of person that would seek out this book in the first place. Video games as they are now are at most a rough simulation of any number of things that are present in real life. It could be decades, if not centuries, before we have anything that could be adequately described as a real one-to-one simulation of day-to-day life in a video game. When we get down that line far enough, it may be worth having this discussion again. But in their current form, pressing a button or an analog stick does not equate to the simulation of real life. As an individual that has had experience playing video games, participated in simulated combat in the form of paintball, and handled real-life firearms in a controlled environment, anyone who claims they are equal or even comparable is talking out of their backside. I'll say it again. Video games do not cause violence. Violent people seek out violent media. This should be easy to understand. It should be the responsibility of a society to monitor and treat people with violent tendencies in order to prevent tragedies. So to review, the 4 times it's okay to say it's just a video game. When someone is too emotionally invested in the moment, when they're becoming overcome with rage and are now displaying reckless behavior. It's not worth the trouble. Number 2. When someone is thinking of giving in to the temptation of putting money into gambling mechanics in the form of loot boxes and they need to come to their senses, it's not worth financial hardship. Number 3. When someone is thinking to themselves they can leave a child in front of a screen, it's not a parent or a guardian. And 4. When someone is trying to allocate blame to say that it was the inspiration for a horrible act that resulted in death, injury, or destruction, it's not a weapon or an instruction manual. These are the times when it's okay to say, it's just a video game. Most any other time has unintended consequences. As an example, someone getting enthusiastic about a game and recounting stories, considering perspectives, and attempting to have a serious discussion about something that's truly touched them, only to be met with the dismissive response of, it's just a video game, man. Video games have long been combating the stigma that they are a useless time waster or the equivalent of a child's toy, that they are shallow power fantasies or nothing more than escapism for weak-minded individuals. They're just video games. When you say this, you discount the worldviews and artistic visions that have been infused into the writing, coding, and execution. In this mindset, messages are lost. Creators are worthless, and the experiences of the individual, what they may learn, share, or new thoughts they may consider, are easily dismissed. BioShock is no longer a statement on scientific progression and human desire. Silent Hill 2 is no longer an examination of psychological torment and guilt at the loss of a loved one. Final Fantasy X no longer remains as an analysis of religious power structures being used as a means to control over a society. They can't have those views. After all, they're just video games. And that mindset is exactly the problem. It's why I will sometimes go at length to defend alternative perspectives and the right to expression as guaranteed by the United States Constitution. You don't have to like it, but every person here has a right to freedom of speech, press, assembly, and by association, expression. And this doesn't apply only to video games. You hardly hear people saying, it's just a book, or it's just a movie. These forms of entertainment have been around long enough to where most people seem to have a base understanding of their importance in the ideas that they can portray and the messages they can relay. We still have a ways to go. Let's just try to remember. It's not just a video game.